we can have a chat after we've finished, but let's learn some Gemarah. Okay, let me see if I can get the right view on here. Gallery view, that's what we want. Right, okay, we're good to go. Can everybody hear me okay? Right, Avril, you've set the record, yes? Very good, excellent. Right, Moedim L'Simcha, everyone. As you can see, I'm sitting in my virtual sukkah here. Marcel is in his sukkah. I can see Jeffrey's in his, and Brian, I think, was in his too. As I said on Sunday in the shiur, we should be doing everything that we normally do in the house. We should be doing in the sukkah. I did give the shiur on Sunday in the sukkah, but the Wi-Fi was a little bit weak, and we kept getting cut off. So in the interests of good Wi-Fi, I have reverted back to my office, but I've got a sukkah background just to make sure that we don't forget that it is Sukkot. So let's get into our Gemarah of Sanhedrin. Let me share my screen with you. Can you see my screen there, which has got Gemarah on it? Yes, okay. So this is where we got to last week. We spoke last week about what the judges had to think about when they were judging, that Hashem was with them in the judgment and they were actually judging in front of Hashem. We finished that little section and we went back to, the body of our Gemarah. And earlier on, we had said that with regard to compromise, once the verdict had been given, it was no longer allowed for the judge to recommend a compromise. So the Gemarah is drilling down, as it often does. It'll make a statement, and then later on, it will drill down on those words and make it clear exactly what we're talking about. So the Gemarah says here, Heichi dami Gemar din. What does it mean when we say Gemar din? We know the word Gemar means same word as nigmar, or which means to be finished. So Gemar din is the finishing of the judgment, in other words, the verdict. So the Gemarah is asking, what does it mean? What exactly is it that constitutes the declaration of the verdict? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Very important that we remember these names, because we're going to throw up a few contradictions later on. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav that what it means is that the judge, or maybe not the judge, maybe the clerk, I don't know, it could be the judge, it could be the clerk, somebody, official, says, Ish ploni, so-and-so, ata chayav, you are liable. Ish ploni, so-and-so, ata zakai, you are not liable. You are free, as it were. You are from the same word as zechut, merit. You have merit. The verdict is in your favor. Chayav means you are obligated. Right? We say that we are chayav b'mitzvah. We're obligated to do a mitzvah. It's the same word. So the Gemarah says, or Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, that the verdict is considered to have been issued when those words, or words to that effect, are spoken. And they say, so-and-so, you are obligated, so-and-so, you are not obligated. And then Rav says something else. It's interesting. There's no, as you know, there is no punctuation at all in the Big Boys Gemarah, in the Vilna edition of the Gemarah. Here, Rav Steinsaltz does put in punctuation for us. And it's interesting to me that he doesn't put a new paragraph here at the end of the word Zakai, where my pointer is. Because actually, we're going off now on a slightly different subject to the one we've been speaking about. And actually, in the Steinsaltz, it does make, sorry, I beg your pardon, in the Art Scroll, it does make a new paragraph. And I think it makes sense that it's a new paragraph here, because we're going to talk about something slightly different. And what we're going to talk about now is another statement of Rav, which is to do with our original subject of compromise. Okay, we've been speaking about compromise for the last few months, and this is going back to the compromise. Amar Rav. Rav says, Halacha Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. The halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. Now, those of you who've not yet looked in the English, look away from the English and tell me if you can remember what it was that Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said. Okay, I'll be very impressed if you can remember it without looking in the English translation or without looking back, because we've done a lot since we actually said what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said. But as you can see, the Gemarah expects us to know it, because it doesn't tell us what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said. We're meant to know this, because after all, we only learnt it further up the same page. Now, it might seem to you that it was decades ago since we learnt this, but if you were in the big boys Gemarah, you would actually see that it is about, let me count them up, it's about 15 or 20 lines further up in the Gemarah. Now, we can't remember it because we're so slow, and also we're not used to learning Gemarah. But the Gemarah expects us to know it. So I'll help you out. Well, actually, Rav Steinsaltz has already helped you out, because now you can look in the English. And Rav says that the halacha regarding compromise is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who said it is a mitzvah to mediate a dispute. Now you remember, yeah? You remember that that's what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said. And if you don't remember, I'm going to take you back over here to page 31 if you're looking in the Steinsaltz English. And there it is in all its glory. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha Omer, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said, mitzvah livtzoah. It is a mitzvah to compromise, to mediate a compromise. And you'll remember that we had a whole load of different opinions, ranging from the compromiser is a blasphemer, all the way across to Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who's at the other end of the spectrum and who said it's a mitzvah to compromise. So let's go back to where we're up to. And as you can see, it's really not that far down the page, but there it is. Rav says the halacha is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. So according to Rav, now this is important that it's according to Rav. According to Rav, we paskin halacha like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who said it's a mitzvah to compromise. So Rav thinks that it's a mitzvah to compromise. Fine, thank you very much. We now know what Rav thinks. Rav is an important person, and we know his view. Now, here we come to this word that we spoke about right at the end of last week's shiur. Inni, question mark. This is not talking about your belly button, whether it's an inni or an outie. Okay, inni, it's a question. Oh, is that so? And whenever you see that in the Gemarah, you know that the Gemarah is going to bring you a proof that what you have just said is not correct. So it goes like this. Inni, is that the case? Really? Question mark. V'ha Rav Huna Talmidei de Rav Hava. But we know that Rav Huna, who was a student of Rav's, okay, now, if somebody is a student of Rav, you would expect him to have the same opinion as Rav, okay? So, Rav Huna, who is a student of Rav, this happened to him. Ki hava atu lakamei de Rav Huna. When a case came in front of Rav Huna as the judge, Amalahu, he would say to them, to the litigants, I dina ba'etu, I pshara ba'etu, question mark. Do you want me to paskin according to the halacha, or do you want me to mediate a compromise? He's asking the question to the litigants. Now, just as an aside, it's amazing how your whole life slots into place when you start to learn Gemarah. Because I think I told you once before, I only ever once went to a sort of din Torah, at least I thought it was a sort of din Torah, with somebody. And when we got in there, the Dayan Yitzchak Berger of the Manchester Bet Din, who is a very, very clever person, and of course knows the halacha inside out, said to us exactly this statement. They said, do you want the psak halacha, or do you want me to mediate a compromise? And I thought that was very weird, because as far as I was concerned, we were in a court of law. We were in a bet din. This had gone to a din Torah. This was a court. Courts give out judgments. They don't give out compromise. This wasn't a mediation court. This was a bet din. And I found that statement very strange. And it remained strange to me until a very long time afterwards, when I came across this idea in this halacha, in this Gemarah, that it is an opinion of Rav Huna, in the name of Rav, I guess, that's what you're meant to do when you have litigants in front of you. The judge is meant to establish, before he starts, what are his terms of reference. And this is what happened in my case. And of course, I didn't really know what to answer, because it was such a strange question. In the end, I think I told you this, but once before, in the end, we agreed that he would listen to the case and try and mediate between us. And he listened to both sides of the story, and he said, "You're both wrong," and he walked out. And that was the end of that, really. And we didn't get any further. So it wasn't really a wonderful experience. If I was going back now, with the benefit of the knowledge that I now have, I'm going back probably, I don't know, more than 15 years at least. It could be as many as 20. But if I was to go back into that court now and hear that question from the Dayan at the beginning, I would have said to him, no, I want you to give me a psak halacha, because I think I was right. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been there. So I would not have answered that I wanted a compromise. I answered that because I didn't really understand the question, to be honest. So there you are. So what's it got to do with our Gemarah? We have just said that Rav has paskened like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said it's a mitzvah to compromise. So if it's a mitzvah to compromise, why did Rav Huna, who is a student of Rav, why did he ask them whether they wanted to compromise? He should have just said it's a mitzvah to compromise, and he should have imposed a compromise on the court. That's the question of the Gemarah. The Gemarah says, I'm not so sure, says the Gemarah when it says inni, I'm not so sure that this statement of Rav is consistent. You're telling me, says the Gemarah, that Rav paskens halacha like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who wants to tell you that it's a mitzvah to compromise. I'm bringing you a case now of Rav Huna, who will be of the same opinion as his Rebbe, as Rav, that he only offered a compromise and he didn't impose it. So the Gemarah says that's a bit of a question against the first statement. How do we square up the statement that Rav goes like Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who says it's a mitzvah, and Rav Huna, who appears to say that it is a an elective procedure whether you choose compromise or halacha. Larry and Sharon have their collective hand up.
Yes, a question. Is it a mitzvah for the judge? Is it a mitzvah also for the participants, for the litigants? Is it a three-way mitzvah, or is it only on the judge to perform the mitzvah of adjudicating a compromise?
And is it appropriate for the judge to put the litigants in that quandary of having to answer for fear that the answer might influence the judge despite his pledge to be impartial?
Okay, so I was right. It was a collective hand up. Okay, let's deal with Sharon's question first. Is it a mitzvah on the judge or is it a mitzvah on the litigants? Here, we're talking about the judge. This is not talking about the litigants. I think that you could certainly argue that it is a mitzvah on the litigants to make a compromise on the basis of a different halacha altogether, which says that you should not have arguments between your brothers, that you should always be somebody who is ohev shalom v'rodef shalom, like Aharon, who, if we are quick enough, we will get to later on today. So I think you could argue it's a mitzvah for the litigants, but that's not what we're talking about here. Here, we're talking about the judge. Rav's opinion is like Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, who says it is a mitzvah for the judge to arrange a compromise in the halacha. Now, to answer Larry's question, which is it fair of the judge to put the litigants in that position? Having been in that position, I would answer that the question was no. That it could just be that the Manchester Bet Din was not organized enough, or I wasn't knowledgeable enough, or it wasn't explained to me carefully enough, the procedure, and it was perhaps understood because both myself and the other litigants were at least ostensibly knowledgeable and religious people, that we would understand the process. I don't think he understood the process either. And I think the correct thing would have been to have done before we went into the court, for the clerk of the court to have explained to us that we had this option, that this is how the court works, and we will be asked this question, and we should consider our answer before going in. So I think the implication of Larry's question was that puts the litigants on the spot, and I think it does. It really, I felt put on the spot personally, and I felt pressured really to answer the way I did. I didn't want to seem unreasonable, so I answered saying yes for compromise, because I felt that if I answered that I wanted a psak, then I would be seen as being obstinate, etc. So I agree with I agree with the implication of your question there, Larry, from personal experience. So let's go back to the Gemarah. We've got a question here. The question is, are these two statements compatible? I saw Julia shaking her head a little bit there before. Julia, have you got some insight on this? What's your view on this?
I just thought that the two weren't incompatible, really, because there's nothing to say that that once you've chosen between the strict judicial decision and a compromise, that compromise can't be a mitzvah. So they're not contradictory, in my view.
Okay, I thought that's what you were going to say, as I could read the shake of your head. I'm getting to know your facial expressions really well.
Sorry.
Okay, I think that's a fair point. And actually, the Gemarah also thinks it's a fair point, because what the Gemarah does to get out of this is this. He says, my mitzvah. So he says, what does he mean? What did Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha mean when he said it's a mitzvah to compromise? And he says, my mitzvah nami dekem omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. What does he mean when he said it's a mitzvah to compromise? And Wow, look, everybody, we're going over the page. We're on page 7a now. And the Gemara says, no, you misunderstood. What he meant, what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha meant when he said it's a mitzvah to compromise, was mitzvah lemeimra lahu, I dina ba'itu, I pshara ba'itu. It's a mitzvah to offer them the compromise. Not that it's a mitzvah necessarily to compromise, but it's a mitzvah for the judge to do what Diane Berger did with us, which is to offer the choice of a compromise or a psak halacha before you start. And that is what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha meant. And that is not incompatible, of course, with what Rav Huna did, because that is exactly what Rav Huna did. So what it means is that it doesn't mean that it's a mitzvah to compromise to the extent that you have to impose a compromise on the litigants. Of course, if you think about it, it can't possibly mean that, because then you would never have any case that came for a judgment. Because if you're going to say it's always a mitzvah to compromise and you can impose compromise on the litigants, then you're never going to get a psak halacha ever, because the judge is going to say, I'm going to compromise because Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says it's a compromise, is a mitzvah. So if you think about it, that statement, if we'd have all thought about it carefully enough, we would have realized that it couldn't have meant what we initially assumed it meant. So the Gemara now explains it to us and says, no, what he meant was it's a mitzvah to offer a compromise between the litigants, as opposed to giving a psak halacha. Now, all very nice, okay? All clean and tidy, yeah? No, it's not clean and tidy. Because if it was clean and tidy, that would be the end of the Gemara. And it isn't, as you can see. So the Gemara says, hey, hang on a minute. Hainu Tanakama. That opinion that you've just told me that was from Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is exactly the same as the opinion of the first Tana. Of the first Tana that we heard earlier on, before Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who said, okay, he says compromise is allowed. Okay, he says it's an elective procedure. Let's go back up to where we were and say it's at the beginning of 6b. Here we are. Right, go down to the bottom of 6a. Tana Rabbanim. This is the Tanakama, the first opinion. Three judges can also do a compromise. And then he says, once the verdict, Nigmar Hadin, this is where we started from today, once the judgment has been issued, it is not permitted for you to mediate a dispute. Implication, before the judgment is issued, before the verdict, it is permitted for you to mediate a dispute. So that the Tanakama says it's an elective choice. You are permitted, but not obliged, to make a compromise. If you are the judge, you are permitted to, and presumably to ask the people whether they want a compromise. And then we went on to say, later on, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says it's a mitzvah to compromise. Now we're saying that Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says that the mitzvah is to offer a compromise. So now the Gemara says, well, in that case, what's the difference between the first opinion and Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha's opinion? There has to be a difference, otherwise, what's the point of bringing it? If Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha agrees with the Tanakama, then there would be no point of saying what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha said. Thank you very much. Jonathan Lieberman agrees with the Tanakama. Who cares what I think? Who cares what Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says if we've already got the opinion of the Tanakama? So there must be a difference between them. This is the question of the Gemara. Hainu Tanakama! Exclamation mark. That's the opinion of the Tanakama. So it can't be. There must be a difference between them. Not often you will have a few words in 2 words in here which would say my beinaihu. What is there between them? In other words, what is the difference between them? And the answer is ika beinaihu. There is something between them. In other words, there is a difference between them. Here, the Gemarah hasn't actually put in the question my beinaihu. What is the difference? It's understood that is the question by him saying, hang on a minute, that's the opinion of the Tanna Kama. And then he says, the Gemarah says, no, ika beinaihu. There is a difference between them, mitzvah, with regard to whether it's a mitzvah or not to compromise. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha savar mitzvah. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says that if you are sitting in front of 2 litigants, Lieberman and his opponent, then it is a mitzvah for you to say to them, would you like a strict psak halacha or would you like a compromise? According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, Dayan Berger clocked up another mitzvah in his tank, in his mitzvah tank, by offering us that compromise. According to the Tanna Kama Sava, the Tanna Kama, which means the first opinion, we're not told who it is, which is why he's referred to as the Tanna Kama. Reshut, he has permission to do so, but he doesn't clock up a mitzvah in his mitzvah tank for doing so. He can, if he wants to, offer us a compromise, but if he didn't offer us a compromise, there would be nobody up there in Shamayim saying, naughty boy, you missed the opportunity for doing a mitzvah here. You could have offered them a compromise and you didn't, and you missed the opportunity for a mitzvah. No, that's the Tanna Kama's opinion is it is entirely permitted, but not obligatory. It's not a mitzvah. A mitzvah comes from the word mitzuvah, to be commanded. If you are mitzuvah, to command you to do something, then you have to do it. So the Gemarah says there is a difference between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says it's a mitzvah to offer the litigants a compromise, and the Tanna Kama says you can if you want.
So is that over and above the Tariag mitzvah, Johnny?
Yes, it's not considered. This is the problem that we have in our wonderful religion, is that we are not pedantic enough with our words, because we use the word mitzvah to mean lots of different things. So we talk about the Tariag mitzvot, the 613 mitzvot, which, by the way, we can't even agree what they are. There are various different opinions as to which of all the mitzvahs in the world are actually in the 613. There's the Sefer HaChinuch that goes through them. Rambam goes through them, and it's in a different 613, not completely different, but the 613 are not exactly the same as the Chinuchs. And there are various other versions of it as well. So there are the Tariag mitzvot, let's say that we could agree on those. And then we have this idea that a mitzvah is a meritorious deed, okay? But not necessarily one of the 613. So often you can find a meritorious deed that you do which can fit into the category of a 613 mitzvot. So, for example, you could say that this is a mitzvah of the 613 mitzvot because we have a mitzvah to set up appropriate courts. We have a mitzvah in Sefer Shoftim, Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha. You have to set up courts, judges, and you could argue that this mitzvah that Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says is part of that mitzvah. But you won't find in any of the lists of the Tariag mitzvah that this specific thing to offer a compromise is counted as one of those 613. You could argue that it belongs to it's a subcategory of one of the mitzvahs if you want, but it's not specifically one of the 613, okay? And then we also use the word mitzvah a bit loosely, don't we? You say, oh, do me a mitzvah, go and get me my slippers, right? Or do me a mitzvah, make me a cup of tea. Well, there's nowhere in the Torah that says it's a mitzvah to go and get me their slippers, unless I'm speaking to my children, of course, in which case it is a mitzvah because they have a mitzvah of kibud av v'aim. So that's the same idea. You won't find in the Rambam or the Sefer HaChinuch that getting me my slippers is a mitzvah, but you will find that kibud av v'aim is listed there in the 613. So does that answer your question, Johnny? Okay. So where were we? Right. So we now have the understanding that there is a difference now between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha. So we're all happy now, aren't we? Because we have two different opinions. Okay, so that's the end of that. The Gemarah is very happy. Yes? No. No, we're not happy. Look at the next bit. Hainu to Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. Well, hang on a minute. If that's the case, if you're saying that the Tanna Kama holds that it is only a permission to offer a compromise to the litigants, then that is exactly the same as the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. Okay, who can tell me, without looking, what the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh was? Well, you ought to be able to tell me just from what I've just said. It's the same as what the Tanna Kama just said. Okay, but because we just said there isn't any difference between them, that's the Gemarah's question. Let's go back up the page and see what Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh actually said. Here we are. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh said, Shnaim, two people, Shabau lefanecha ladin, two people who came before you for a judgment. Ad shalot tishma divrehen, remember it now, until you've heard their respective evidence. Or misha tishma divrehen ve'iyata yodeh lechen din noteh, or you've heard their evidence, but you don't know which way the case is leaning. Ata rashai, you are permitted, the same word as rashut that the Tanna Kama used. You are permitted, lomar lahem, to say to them, su'u bitsu, go out and compromise. So you are permitted to tell them to go and compromise. So the Gemarah says, hang on a minute. If you're telling me now that the Tanna Kama's view is that it is reshut, it is only a permission to offer a compromise to the litigants, that's the same as Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh just said earlier on in the page. So again, I'll put those words in for you. My beinayu. What is the difference between them? And the Gemarah, of course, answers, Ika beinayu. There is a difference between them. What is the difference? The difference is, listen carefully to what Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh said. He said, Misha tishma divrehen, va'ata yodea lahechan adin noteh, I ata rashai loma lahen tsu'u uvitsu. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, once you've heard the evidence and you know which way you're leaning in towards in terms of the verdict, you haven't made the verdict yet, but you know which way it's going, at that point, you are not permitted to offer a compromise to the litigants. That's according to Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh. According to the Tanna Kama, it's not too late. You can offer a compromise right up to the time that we said, let's go back to what we started with this morning, right up to the time that you say, Ish ploni ata chayav, so-and-so, you are obliged to pay. You are the one that is guilty, or the other one that has to cough up. Ish ploni ata zakah, you are the one who is, how does he say it? Who is exonerated, that's the word. Liable, that's the word I was looking for before. Chayav is liable. So according to the Tanna Kama, right up to the time where the verdict is verbalized, you can still offer a compromise. You can say to the litigants, it's a bit like, I don't know, I suppose Russian roulette, really. You can say to the litigants, right up to the end of the verdict, you can say to them, actually, guys, I know which way I'm leaning here, but I'm not going to tell you. And if you want to go and compromise, then you still have the opportunity to do so. Do you want to go and compromise? Or do you want to hear what I've got to say in terms of the judgment? That's the view of the Tanakhama. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh agrees to a degree, but not completely. He agrees that you can offer that compromise, but only up to the point where you do not know which way you're leaning. Once you know which way it's going, you're no longer allowed to offer a compromise to the litigants. So we then have a nice idea separating all of the opinions. And as you can see, we've come to our little symbol here, which means we are come to the end of that little discussion. And I sent to you just about 20 minutes ago on WhatsApp, I sent you a photograph of something in the Art Scroll Gemarah, which I'm going to try and get up on the screen. Let me see if I can get it up on the screen. Let's have a look. Can you see that on the screen? Yeah?
Yeah. Yes.
Good. Okay. So the Art Scroll gives us a very nice little summary here of the 4 different opinions regarding compromise. Now, I am going to take that off and put something else up because I'm going to see if you can tell me what the 4 are without me showing you, and then I'll show it to you. Right? Who would like? You've all got it in front of you. John has got it in front. Okay. Anybody who's not read it, who would like to have a go at summarizing the 4 opinions on compromise? Hands up if you want to have a go.
No, I only want to do one.
Go on, Julia, have a go. Come on.
No, I only want to do one, which
Okay,
is,
you
I
do
remember
one.
the very first one was that it's absolutely forbidden to mediate. The very first man was very harsh.
He was very harsh. Do you remember his name? Do you remember
absolutely
his name?
not. But it's part of a mnemonic.
It is part of a mnemonic. You're right. It is part of a mnemonic. You're right. It was Rabbi Yossi ben Aglili, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Or hang on a minute. I can't remember myself now. It was Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So you're quite right, Julia. He's number 4 in our list there. He said it is forbidden for a judge to impose a compromise. And you remember, and we're going to come back to it in a minute, he quoted a pasuk that said, a compromiser is a blasphemer. It's a terrible thing to do, to compromise. So you're right, that was Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So here is the summary from the Art Scroll. Going, I suppose, in order of leniency to harshness, Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says it is a mitzvah to offer the option of compromise, but you don't have to impose it. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha says it's a mitzvah to offer it. Clearly, Deinberger of the Manchester Bet Din agrees with him because that's what he did. The Tanakhama says you have permission to offer a compromise, but once the verdict is given, that's it. So in other words, if I put it a different way, you can offer a compromise. It's not a mitzvah to do so, it's a permission. You can offer a compromise right up till the verdict is given. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh goes one step less and says you can offer a compromise, but only up until the time when you, the judge, know which way you are leaning towards the judgment. And fourthly, as Julia said, Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, he says absolutely not. There should be no compromise. It is a very bad thing to do. And he quoted the pasuk, which we're going to come back to very shortly. Okay, and let's go back to the Gemarah. We have come to our little symbol, and that is the end of that little subject. That is the end of that little subject. So before we move off that little idea of the where you can compromise, how you should compromise, and at what point you should compromise, has anybody got any questions or comments regarding that little sugya? The word sugya means that little subject matter.
I do have one. It just occurred to me that is it because Larry would be able to answer this question. But in American crime dramas, you often see settlements. And when you said about allowing a compromise right up to the last minute, I wondered whether there was a stage in legal proceedings at which you can settle and withdraw, or is that right up to the time of judgment?
Larry, before you answer that question, let me just point out that these cases we are dealing with here are not criminal cases. These are civil cases. Remember what we started our Gemarah with back in November? Can you believe it's almost a year? We're in October now. So back a year ago, we started with those famous words, Dinei Mamonot Bishlosha. These are civil cases. In terms of criminal cases in Jewish law, criminal cases are not subject to compromise. Criminal cases must be judged according to the halakha. So that's before Larry answers the interesting question. What we're talking about here is civil cases. The American crime dramas where they do deals and what have you is not something that would be replicated in Jewish law. Yes, Larry.
Very quickly, 70+% of all criminal cases settle either before trial or during trial, but prior to verdict. But there's no prohibition. Once the verdict comes in, it's just not practical. The same is true of civil cases. The parties can always say to a judge at any point in the trial, we want to sit down and talk and try and resolve this case. And the judge will always say, probably with the different expression, hey, do what you want. So there is no prohibition, Julia. And it, again, all the way up to even while the jury is out, I've seen cases where settlements have been entered into by the parties.
Can I ask you, Larry, how does that work in a criminal case? If the jury is out, in practical terms, how does that work? What's the settlement?
Well, it less frequently happens when you've gotten all the way to the jury, but usually what the parties would say, they would come to the judge and say, Your Honor, the parties have reached a resolution of the case, and the individual, either the case is going to be dropped by the prosecutor or the defendant wants to plead guilty. Right. And the judge would say, that's fine. And so
okay. Now I understand.
The judge would simply call the jury in and say, thank you very much for your service. But the case has been settled by the parties.
Right, I understand. Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, of course, in Jewish law, there is no such thing as a jury of your peers. Halakha is judged by dayanim, not by lay people. Okay. Any other questions before we move on to the next little sugya? Okay. In that case, let's go on, because we're not really going on, as you'd imagine. We're actually going.
Johnny, excuse me. In point number 4, it says, Rabbi Elazar, son of Yossi Aglili, said it is forbidden for a judge to impose a compromise. what does impose mean? To make them compromise or to offer?
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a great choice of language there by the article, because Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion is that the judges should not be involved in compromise at all.
Yes.
So I think it's just an expression that they've used, perhaps not quite so accurately, because Rabbi Elazar ben Yossi, Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion, if you remember, was that a compromiser is considered to be a blasphemer. It's absolutely not on. And it was he that used the expression bitsua as opposed to pshara, because of its negative connotations with the pasuk that we're actually going to come back to right this minute. So actually that was a good introduction, Johnny, to the next little piece of Gemarah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next piece of Gemarah goes like this. Upligi de Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai. And there were various people, upliga, that means to argue. Various people argued with this person called Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai, who said, Lo nema mikra ze ela kneged maaseh ha'egel. This verse was only said, remember we've got a sentence, we learned this right at the beginning of the Gemarah, lo ela or ein ela, not only, means this verse was only referring to. So this verse only refers to the episode of the golden calf. Now, pretend that you don't have the Steinsaltz to tell you what this is talking about. How on earth are you meant to know which verse the Gemarah is talking about? It just says, Lo nema mikra zeh, this verse. Which verse? We've quoted hundreds of verses. We've quoted Tehillim, we quoted Zechariah, we quoted Shmuel Aleph when we talked about David HaMelech, remember? We talked about David HaMelech paying out of his pocket that Howard, who's not with us today, got so upset about. We've quoted loads of different psukim. How are you meant to know which verse the Gemarah is talking about? Well, here we are. Rabbi Steinsaltz helped us out, and he tells us that the verse we're talking about here is this verse here from Tehillim, chapter 10, verse 3, and I've got it ready for you here. You'll remember it. Ki hilel rasha al ta'avat nafsho, and here is the bit that we're interested in. Ubotsea beirech ni'etz Hashem, and translated here on the Chabad website as the robber congratulates himself for having blasphemed Hashem. If you remember, we quoted this pasuk, and an earlier Tana spoke about it being related to Yehuda. Do you remember Yehuda and Yosef? Yosef was sold, and Yehuda said, Ma betza, what benefit do we get if we kill him? Let's not kill him. Let's flog him to the Ishmaelim. At least we'll get some dosh for him. And that was considered to be a compromise. And earlier on, we were very critical of Yehuda for doing that compromise. And the Tana who spoke about that, whose name escapes me right now, could look it up, but I'm not going to, was critical of Yehuda and used this pasuk to be critical of Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai uses this verse in a totally different way. He uses it to be critical of somebody else. Now, who is he critical of? He is critical of Aharon HaKohen. This bit of Gemarah and the Mefarshim that go with it is one of the classic pieces. I get in trouble every time I say this, so those of you who are offended by this, I apologize in advance. This is one of the classic pieces of whitewash that our rabbis do. And the whitewash here is on Aharon HaKohen. You will remember the story in Sefer Shemot that Bnei Yisrael stood at Har Sinai. Moshe Rabbeinu went up the mountain. They miscalculated that he was meant to come down on a certain day, and he didn't. And then they made a golden calf. And who was involved in making the golden calf? It was Aharon. Aharon wasn't the prime mover of it, but he was the facilitator of it. Let's have a look in Chumash and see what we're talking about here. This is in Shemot chapter 32. I don't see Leon. Leon, are you with us? Don't think Leon's with us. Okay.
I am.
Oh, you are there.
Yes.
Leon was hiding. Right, Leon, chapter 32 from the top, please.
From verse 1, yes.
Verse 1.
The people saw that Moses had delayed in descending the mountain, and the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Rise up, make for us gods that will go before us. For this man Moses, who brought us up from Egypt, we do not know what became of him."
Okay, stop there, Leon. Stop there. Now, if you were Aaron a Kohen, and you were, as it were, second in command after Moshe, and you are now de facto the leader of the Jewish people, and by the way, you also happen to be the Kohen Gadol, and you also happen to have had intimate conversations with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and the people came to you and said, "Hey, we don't know what's happened to Moshe. Let's make some gods who will go before us." What do you think your response would be?
Give him another day or two.
You would try and put them off, wouldn't you? At best, you would try and put them off. At your most righteous, you would say, "What are you talking about? You can't make gods. You've just heard 5 minutes ago at Har Sinai from the mouth of God himself, do not make any graven images. Do not make any gods of molten whatever. Ale Elohei Masechot, don't make them. And now you're coming to me 5 minutes later and you want to make a god? What are you talking about?" I would like to think that that would be my response if I was Aaron a Kohen. But let's actually see, Leon, what his response was.
Aaron said to them, "Remove the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, sons and daughters, and bring them to me." The entire people removed the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took it from their hands and bound it up in a cloth and fashioned it into a molten calf. They said, "This is your God, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt."
Okay, let's stop there. So what did he do? He did exactly what he's not meant to do. He made a golden calf. And the pasuk, in case you try and tell me that he didn't make it, he says, they took off their earrings and they brought it to Aharon. He took it in the singular. He took it from their hands. Vayatzar oto, and he fashioned it in the singular. That can only refer to Aaron. Bacheret, with some kind of engraving tool. Vayaasehu egel masecha, and they made it. Vayaasehu, they made it into a egel masecha. He was involved in this thing. Now, that was a strange response from Aaron a Kohen. Let's go on to our pasuk now. Verse 5, Leon.
Aaron saw and built an altar before him. Aaron called out and said, "A festival for Hashem tomorrow."
Okay, let's stop there. And our Gemarah, which we're going to go back to in a sec, quotes this pasuk. Vaya Aharon vayiven mizbeach lefanav. When Aaron Vaya Aaron, Aaron saw, doesn't say what he saw, presumably he saw that which has gone on in the previous pasuk, which is the egel, the calf. Vayiven mizbeach lefanav, and he built an altar in front of it. That is what Aharon did. So far, all I've done is quote the Torah. Let's go back to the Gemarah. So, Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai says that this verse in Tehillim, which talks about compromise, Bitsua, being a blasphemer of God, refers to Aaron, and he quotes the verse which we've just said. Shene'emar, Vaya Aharon, Vayiven Mizbeach Lefanav. And Aaron saw, and he built an altar in front of him, in front of it. Asks the Gemarah, Ma Ra'ah. What was it that he saw? And here comes the whitewash. Amar Rabbi Binyamin bar Yefet, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Binyamin bar Yefet says in the name of Rabbi Elazar, Ra'ah chur she'zavuach lefanav. They interpret, he interprets this verse something different. We understood the verse to mean, and Aaron saw, what did he see? Presumably, he saw the thing we just mentioned, the egel. Vayiven mizbeach lefanav, and he built a altar in front of it. Rabbi Elazar says, no. When it says Vaya Aharon, and Aaron saw, what he saw was Chur. Chur was, if you like, Aaron's sidekick. How do we know that he was Aaron's sidekick? If you remember, there was a story of the war against Amalek, where Yehoshua took the soldiers out to battle. Moshe Rabbeinu sat himself on a rock at the top of a hill. We learn this on Purim. He sat himself on a rock at the top of a hill, and he put his hands up. And when his hands were up, the Bnei Israel were winning the war. And when his hands went down, Amalek were winning the war. And when his hands went up, then they were winning the war. So, of course, he needed to keep his hands up. But he got tired. His arms were tired. You try holding your hands up all day. It's quite hard. So what did they do? They got Hur and Aaron, one on either side of him, to hold up his arms. So Hur and Aaron were Moshe's supports. They were the physical supports of his arms on those particular days. But Aaron and Hur, as well as Yehoshua, were the team. They were team Moshe. So what had happened here, according to Rabbi Elazar, and Rashi quotes this from a midrash, is that Hur had said exactly what I just said that I would like to think I would say if I'd been Aaron. When they suggested making a golden calf or a god, Hur said to the leaders of the people, what are you talking about? You're not allowed to do that. That's completely forbidden. Dreadful thing to do. You've just heard from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're not allowed to do it. Absolutely not. Hang on, Moshe will be back. And what happened to Hur? They killed him. They killed him. And that's what this means. Shezavuach lefanav. Zavuach, they slaughtered him. The people slaughtered Hur. Okay? So this is what Aaron saw. Aaron saw, and he uses the word mizbeach as a play on words that Aaron saw Hur slaughtered in front of him. In other words, they killed Hur in front of Aaron. So Aaron then thinks to himself, oh boy, now I'm in trouble, because if I say the same thing as Hur, then I'm going to end up in the same boat as him, and they're going to kill me. Now, you could argue that there are 3 cardinal sins for which one has to give up one's life. and they are murder, the forbidden sexual relations, and the third one is avodah zarah. Now, to my simple mind, you can't get much clearer avodah zarah than making a mizbeach in front of a golden calf. Why then did Aaron not follow Hur's lead and say, I cannot agree to this golden calf business, and if I'm going to have to lose my life because of it, then so be it. Then that's what I have to do, because this is one of the 3 cardinal averot. So that's the question that we have, that I have against this statement so far from Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai. And we're going to stop there because we're out of time and I don't want to rush this next bit.
Also, Vayiven has 2 meanings, doesn't it?
That's right, yes. Vayiven has 2 meanings as well. Let's just go that. Thank you for that. So the Pasuk says, Vaya Aharon Vayiven Mizbeach Lefanav. Literally, it means Aaron saw and he built an altar in front of it, i.e. in front of the Egel. What the interpretation is, Vaya Aharon, Aaron saw Hur, Vayiven, from the word, not from the word boneh, to build, but from the word mevin, to understand. Vayavin, and he understood. He understood what would happen to him if he did the same thing, and he understood that what would happen is the same as what happened to Hur, mezuvach lefanav, who was slaughtered in front of him. So these words, Vaya Aharon Vayiven Mizbeach Lefanav, are interpreted by the Midrash as meaning that this is the cheshbon that Aharon HaKohen took into account when he made his decision as to do what he did. We'll go into it into more detail. I'll come to you in one sec, Stanley. We'll go into it in more detail, exactly what Aaron's thought processes were according to the Midrash and according to Rabbi Tanchum bar Chanilai. We'll go into that next week. I don't want to rush this because it's important that we go through this in correct detail, and we're already over time. So I'm going to leave you on tenterhooks there. Those of you who have not got a Gemarah to look in, I could show you that down there, but I'm not going to. You're going to have to wait till next week. Those of you who've got a Gemarah and want a sneak preview, it's on page 7a. So we're going to leave it there. Stanley's got a question before we wrap up. Yes, Stanley.
This business with Egel, it's a very bad business for Aaron, and it's very, I don't know, I cannot find any justification by rabbis why he did it. If even he can saw Hur and he was, scared to be killed, he doesn't deserve to be a big leader of the nation.
Okay, I have to say that is my view too at this particular point. And in this particular point in the Gemarah, that is the conclusion that we have. What we're going to see next week is an attempt to explain his behavior and to justify his behavior. So you'll have to hang on till next week to find out how the Gemarah suggests that we should justify his actions. Okay?
Because man was killed just for gathering wood on Shabbat. It's much less offense.
You would think so.
Compared to leader.
But I am with you on this one. But we have to hear what the Gemarah's got to say next week, and then we can hear whether you are satisfied with the Gemarah's justification of Aharon's actions. Okay? Any other comments before we say goodbye? Okay, next week we will find out how Aaron HaKohen's actions are explained away, and we will see that it is not quite so straightforward, and certainly what's important to note is even if we do not accept, or we do accept the justification, that what is acceptable, because the Gemarah does it, and Rabbi Tanchum Bar Chanilai does it, and we saw it with the previous Tana with Yehuda, it is acceptable to question the actions of the people in the Torah. There are those people who say that we are not allowed to question their actions, and their actions must have been completely righteous, and we just don't understand their level, and therefore it's not for us to criticize them at all. The fact that the Gemarah goes on to criticize and to then justify and then comes to a conclusion means that it is a reasonable thing to do. And as I've said many times, and you've all heard me say many times, we are a warts and all Oliver Cromwell religion. We have to learn from the good, and we have to learn from the not so good as well. This is a great example, and this Gemarah, which we will go into in more detail next week, will give us a wonderful example of how it is not only acceptable, but it's a learning experience to question and to try and justify, maybe justify, the actions of our great people in our past. So that is what we will do next week. And in the meantime, I will wish you Moadim L'Simcha, Chag Sameach for the end of Chag. Those of you who haven't yet had a look at the Tchelet video on Simchat Torah, it's only about 15 minutes long. If you haven't yet looked at it, have a little look at it. We're all very keen on your feedback, even if it's negative, or especially if it's negative, really. So let us know what you think. And I will send out the timetables, etc., for the rest of Chag when I've done them, together with various bits of information for next week. And a little quick heads up, you can be the first lot to know that we will be starting the medical ethics course on the 20th of October. A flyer will be sent round just as soon as Avril has finished the final touches to it. And registration will be required because numbers are limited, and I suspect it's going to be quite popular. So, Moadim L'Simcha, everyone. Chag Sameach.
Sameach, thank you, Johnny.
Thank you, Johnny. Chag Sameach, Moadim L'Simcha.
Moadim L'Simcha.
Thank you, Johnny. Moadim L'Simcha.